People will take the Bible in our culture, and they'll use the Bible to say, you've got to be Republican. Excuse me? You've got to be Republican if you take the Bible seriously. No, that's false. You've got to be Democrat. Excuse me? Yeah, man, if you really take the Bible seriously, you've got to be Democrat. You've got to vote Democratic. That's totally false. The text says nothing about America. The text says nothing about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. When the text is silent, we have to respect the text and treat it honestly.
So I guess the fundamental premise of the New Testament is ultimately that Jesus is the Messiah as promised in the Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible, whichever you want to refer to it as.
Yeah.
However, what would you say about the fact that he doesn't meet many of the outlined requirements for the Messiah to come? The most prominent one being, are you familiar with Isaiah 7:14?
Read it to me. 7:14. I mainly go by chapter 53 in Isaiah, but there's a bunch in Isaiah talking about Christ as the prophetic figure.
Right. So here we go. So the English translation is as follows. Hold on. All right. So the English translation is as follows. Therefore, the Lord Himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and call him Emmanuel. However, in the original Hebrew, the word they use for virgin, the word that was translated to, so in Greek, they did use the word for virgin, which is, I believe, parthenos, which, I mean, excuse my pronunciation, but in the original Hebrew, they used the word alma, which means something more like young woman. So, for example, like there is a distinction made between a virgin and a young woman in many Hebrew writings, and that distinction is made clear. So, I guess that's the main source of conflict.
I would see a contradiction as if she wasn't a virgin. If chapter 7 was specifically stating that. But she was a young woman and a virgin. Many people, many commentators will say that she was as young as 12 years old, because many women were birthing at the age of 12 back then. So I wouldn't say that's a direct contradiction. Now, it's fascinating you bring up Isaiah, though, because basically all of the figures that are being prophesied about in Isaiah point directly to Christ. I would encourage you to read the whole book. It's just replete with it. And I'll go to chapter 53. It talks about a bruised reed. It talks about this suffering servant whose bones will be broken for us. That's the death and resurrection of Christ. Then it talks about how Jesus came from the line of David around 1000 BC.
They specify that he was to be of the paternal line, not
Yes.
the maternal line.
Yes, exactly. So the kingly line from David, and then you get the genealogy starting in Matthew 1, which talks about this is Jesus, this is where he's from, not just this divine principle. Because a woman was up here yesterday talking about how Jesus is basically a divine principle, and that divine principle is throughout all religions. That's clearly not the case, because you get the full genealogy there in Matthew chapter 1, which you also got to check out. But that's fascinating there in Isaiah 7. I've never heard someone bring that one up and argue that way.
There's a few more. For example,
go.
The prophecy states that the whole world will worship the one God of Israel.
Yep.
That knowledge of God will fill the world, and knowledge not just being faith, but true knowledge that very few even believers might have.
Mm-hmm. So how's that a contradiction for what's occurring in the New Testament?
More in the case that the promises of the Messiah aren't quite so fulfilled by Jesus. Or rather, the conditions for the Messiah to come weren't met at that time and aren't met now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is the stance from which I'm arguing, which, I feel that makes the...
But isn't the return of Christ when the promise is going to be fulfilled at the end of time in terms of that knowledge?
The original prophecy says nothing about the return. This is like me, for example, ordering pizza and saying the pizza guy will be wearing a red hat and a blue shirt that says Domino's Pizza on it, and he will be bringing a box of pizza. A guy knocks on my door, and he's wearing a red hat and a blue shirt, but he doesn't have a box of pizza. You know, in that case, I can't safely conclude that he is my pizza guy. You know, just because he says to be, ultimately, it doesn't matter. He doesn't have the pizza, so I can't trust his claim. You know, that's like saying, oh, he must be the pizza guy. He'll just bring it next time. You know.
So why was Jesus quoting the Old Testament throughout his entire life, especially when he's dying on the cross for his enemies? And he quotes Psalm chapter 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's literally pulling from the Old Testament, making claims that he is God. So you're right, we can still discount him, but I believe it's crystal clear that he's claiming to be God, and that the Old Testament is making that claim as well, pointing to Christ as God.
The Old Testament doesn't specifically say that he will be God. If I'm not mistaken, the Jewish Messiah was to be fully human, and many other Messiah claims have also quoted from the Old
Judaism,
Testament in the
yeah.
same way.
Yep. What faith position do you come from?
I come from a skeptic position. I'm arguing more from the internal consistency of Christianity as a religion.
Okay. So at the end of the day, I don't get your problem with it, because Melchizedek clearly points to Christ as well. You have the Trinity clearly displayed throughout Genesis, and then you have Jesus making all these claims. He makes 8 claims in the Gospel of John alone that he is God. And then you have thousands of years of history in the church that the Orthodox Church started saying that, no, this is Jesus, God incarnate, from the Old Testament. So you got to be thinking through those. What in the world is that talking about? And were basically the gospel writers lying, or did they just hallucinate or forget with the genealogies? Because they were not disconnected, don't forget. Right?
Again, the word claim, you use the word claim. How do we know that Jesus is God or the Messiah? You know, there have been many other Messiah claimants. There have been many other religious leaders who claim to be of some divine nature.
And that's the interesting one you just put your finger on. Great point. There were tons of Messiah figures in Jesus' day. Many people don't know that. Many people really had no idea that that's true. They were all either killed for claiming to be the Messiah, or their small little groups and contingencies dispersed because they realized, no, this person isn't really the Messiah. Okay, how did Jesus somehow pull the wool out of everyone's eyes, over everyone's eyes, that I am the Messiah? Well, clearly he was doing miracles, it was his teaching, it was his lifestyle, but ultimately it was his death and resurrection. That is the linchpin at the end of the day. If that didn't happen, then there's no way to say that Jesus is truly God, and you're right. But you got to deal again with that number. Why did 2/3, most of them Jews, all of a sudden become Christians? 2/3 of the entire Roman Empire, who believed that there would be this political king coming, and you referred to this just a man, solely man, and that the resurrection would be at the end of time, certainly not a man raising from the dead.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about the 2/3, and to that I'd like to say that I will admit there were a lot of practical benefits to becoming a Christian rather than, you know, a Jew or a pagan, for example.
Being martyred?
Huh?
Like being martyred?
Oh, that was one of the downsides.
That was not a practical, yeah.
No, but later on, especially as Christianity took hold in Greece, for example, Christians at the time were more egalitarian than pagans.
I would say there were benefits when Constantine came. But no, early Christianity, there were no benefits, I would say, at the end of the day. There was a ton of risk involved, a ton of death, and a ton of imprisonment. These people wouldn't die for what they knew to be a lie, would they? That would be idiocy. At the end of the day, they saw the risen Christ, and we talked about this yesterday. Jesus' own brother, who did not believe he was the Messiah his entire life, saw him risen from the dead, and so he became the leader of the early church and ended up dying for his faith. You got to grapple with that one.
In Genesis we read, God created the heavens and the earth, and God created a man named Adam and a woman named Eve. And he put them in the Garden of Eden for a purpose, to work it. Work is a gift from God. Money represents our work. It is good to work it is good to make money. But then the question becomes, what am I going to do with the money that I make? Obviously, providing for our families and ourselves is very important. Obviously, saving some for the future is important. But equally important is learning to give money away to help others, investing in other people. Paul's brother gave him a car, a brand new car, shiny car, for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, he came out of his office and saw a little street urchin standing next to his car, admiring it. He said to the kid, "Would you like a drive in it?" And the kid looked up at him and said, "Yes, sir." And then Paul said, "You know, I was given this car by my brother as a Christmas present. I haven't paid a dime for it." And the little boy said, "Really? Boy, I wish." And Paul said, yeah, to himself, "I bet you wish that you had a brother like that." But instead, the little kid continued, "Boy, I wish I could be a brother like that." And that statement jarred Paul right to his heels. As they're driving around the city looking at some of the Christmas windows, suddenly the little street kid looks up at Paul and says, "Sir, could you drive me past my home?" And Paul immediately thought, yeah, I bet this little kid would like his neighbors to see what a fine car he's being driven around in. But as they got near his home, the little kid said, "Sir, could you park right in front of my home and let me run inside quickly?" And Paul said, "Sure." So he parked and the little kid ran inside. And the little kid came back, walking very slowly, carrying his crippled brother. He put his crippled brother down on the step right next to the sidewalk, and he pointed at the car and at Paul and said, "His brother gave him that car. I hope to do that for you one day. And then we'll be able to drive around together and see all the Christmas windows that I've been telling you about." Paul got out of the car, picked up the little kid, the crippled kid, put him in the front seat. The older brother sat beside him. And Paul drove around the city, showing those two boys the Christmas windows. Paul understood that Christmas like never before. The meaning of Jesus' words, "It is more blessed to give than it is to receive." We read in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son." And Joseph's brothers stood before him, and Joseph could have thrown the book at him and nailed him, had him executed, or at least put in prison for the dastardly thing they had done to their brother Joseph, selling him into slavery. Instead, Joseph said, "You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good, to save many people." In other words, Joseph got the bigger perspective on life, the perspective that included God, the all-powerful sovereign Lord, who can take warped things that human beings do and bring good out of them. And Joseph understood it was important to give forgiveness to his brothers. And Paul began to understand that Christmas, like never before, the importance of giving to others and building others up. Yes, it's good to work. God created us to work. Yes, it's good to make money. God created us to make money. But then we've got to think hard about what to do with that money. Many of us are in a position of privilege as citizens of this great country, the United States of America. But we are responsible, because we have as much money as we do, to give, and to give some more. What motivates you to do that? The grace of God. When you begin to understand and grasp God's generosity to you, that changes your heart. You see, friends, Christianity is not following a set of rules tacked up alongside a wall. Give this money to that person. Rather, Christianity, vital, dynamic Christianity, is a love relationship with a God who is gracious and generous and who loves each one of us and has given us so many gifts. It's incredible. And when you begin to understand and grasp the generosity of God, the grace of God, you become a gracious, generous person. God bless you as you put your faith in Jesus Christ, receiving the gift of eternal life from Him, and then learning to live a life of gracious generosity. God bless you as you make that decision. When you say you're a skeptic, what does that mean?
It means I withhold judgment in the absence of evidence.
Okay, so obviously you do believe that your rational mind is intact.
Yes, I'd like to think so.
Okay?
I am just a human being, and I'm sure that there are many places where I slip up, or I do go more off of my emotion than what I know to be true.
I'm sure we all do at times. All right. So then my question is very simple. What are you living for as a thinking person? What are you living for? And obviously you're motivated by something or someone. You wouldn't be standing here dressed the way you are, articulating the way you are, if you weren't living for something or someone. And the second question is, as a skeptic, what's the evidence that whatever it is you're living for is true?
Well, this is actually one of the things where I feel that I don't believe that there is any, as such, great purpose that all humans need to fulfill. I feel that everyone has their own purpose that they need to find for themselves. For me personally, I'll admit I'm still in the process of working that out. For some people, it's going and helping others, giving their life to philanthropy. For others, it is for believers, it might be their God, whichever God they believe in. For others, it might be conquering the business world, becoming a tech mogul, what have you. And for some people, it's just as simple as starting a family, having a spouse and children that they love. I don't believe that there's one great purpose that everyone needs to fulfill. I think everyone tends to make their own.
I think it's real clear that you are living for something. Something or someone is supreme. You couldn't be a student here. You couldn't be working as hard as you're working without a motive. I would encourage you to dig deep and to ask yourself, what is motivating me? Because when you get the answer to that question, then you will know what you're living for. You'll know what's motivating you. You'll know what is your God. Be it a career, be it intellectual attainment of a certain degree, a PhD or whatever, be it the accumulation of money through a high-paying job after you've gotten a good education here. But sir, you can't be here at this fine university without being a highly motivated person. You did not arrive here by accident. My point is, skepticism is a nice option, but you will put your head on your pillow tonight the same way I will put my head on my pillow. And like it or not, sir, I am living for someone or something, and so are you. Now, yes, we're in process of checking it out, of adding, subtracting. But, sir, I hate to tell you, you are motivated, obviously. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. You're a highly motivated human being, which means you are living for someone or something. Someone or something is supreme, which means that's the object of your worship. I'm asking you, what is the supreme object of your allegiance, what's motivating you through life? And secondly, what's the evidence that that object, whatever that object is reliable, is not going to rip you off?
Well, I guess as of now, what motivates me is the pursuit of personal growth. And to that I say, sure, there is not necessarily a guarantee that that won't rip me off. For all I know, I could be sitting on my deathbed, say, 70 years from now, or let's be realistic, 60 years from now. And, be thinking, man, like, I had so much potential I wasted. I could have done this with my life. I could have, done this better in college or in my career or whatnot. You're right, that isn't something that's necessarily reliable.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like what you're saying is, Cliff, I'm living to be a success, and I define success.
Yes, and I think everyone, whether they like it or not, does define what success means to them. As I said, for some people, for Steve Jobs, success might have been, creating this tech empire.
Right.
For Joe the plumber down the street, success is, having a wife and kids that he loves. Success is defined by each person on their own.
Okay, now I'm standing here saying, if there is no God, success is whatever you define it to be.
Sure.
But if there is a God, it's possible that you and I were created for a purpose. And according to Christ, that is correct. According to Christ, the purpose for which God created us is to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So if what you say is true, that there is no God, which is, am I wrong or right on that one?
I don't believe there is a God, but I'm happy to admit I'm wrong in the face of evidence.
Okay. So if there is no God, life is ultimately a crapshoot. It doesn't matter whether you're Adolf Hitler II or whether you're Mother Teresa II, because life is ultimately meaningless. So if you want to slaughter people like Hitler did and define that as success, then Hitler was a success. If you want to define success like Mother Teresa did, that working among the dying in Calcutta, India is good and that's the definition of success, then do that. But you see, sir, if there is no God, it means there is no purpose ultimately to life. You create your own purpose, and obviously Adolf Hitler created his own purpose, and Mother Teresa created her own purpose. So you see, it doesn't really matter what you do.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter what you do. For example, if you leave the world in a worse state than you find it, or you cause mass human suffering, then I think most people with a basic sense of morality would get the sense that, yeah, what you did was a failure.
Who defines basic sense of morality? Who defines that? What is the foundation of your values? What is the basis of your understanding that racism is wrong? If human beings are simply highly developed monkeys, why on earth would you say that a human being is more valuable than a monkey or than a cow?
Well, we're social animals. As social animals, we do inherently value each other on some level more than we value a crow or a dog.
Yeah, but why? Is that idiocy? Is that just human arrogance to think that I, because I'm a human being, am more valuable than a crow or a dog?
Well, if we value other members of our own species, we're more likely to survive.
Okay, so the basis of morality is survival, then, is what I hear you saying. We have values, we have morality, so we can survive. Is that
survival is a component, yes. And survival goes beyond, in my view, survival goes beyond just an individual survival. I'm not saying if surviving meant I would have to kill 3 people near me and devour them. I'm not saying that would be moral. What I'm saying with survival here is survival is a component, but another component is maximizing the capacity for human happiness as a whole.
Fine. So your definition of survival is maximizing the capacity for happiness. Well, what happens if I get my happiness from raping women? Who are you to tell me that I'm wrong? If everything's relative, and if values are just created in our heads, then you create your values in your head, I create my values in my head.
Well, there's the fact
if I say that slavery helps me economically, and it helps me provide for my family, who are you to tell me in my culture that my slavery is wrong? If everything's relative, what are you getting so hot under the collar about when it comes to racism or slavery or rape or whatever? I mean, live out what you believe. And if there is no God, if morality is relative, then it's all a crapshoot. And it really doesn't matter whether you're Adolf Hitler II or Mother Teresa II. It's all meaningless. It's all a bias, a prejudice. Now I'm saying, guess what? None of you can live that out. You might tell me you're a moral relativist. You might tell me you're a skeptic. Guess what, sir? Skepticism goes just so far because you have to decide how you're going to treat people. And you can't be confronted by racism and say, oh, I'm just going to be a skeptic. No, you have to make a decision. Am I going to be racist or am I going to respect all people? And if I am going to respect all people, why? What's the basis of human significance and value and dignity? And if I am going to be racist, why? Why should I denigrate another human being just because they're of a different ethnic heritage? You've got to think and ask, why do I hold to the values I hold to? What is the basis of my values? And if you're going to tell me, as a skeptic, that it's all relative, fine. I respect your right to be a skeptic and to say that morality is relative, but you better not come off telling me that rape is really wrong, that gassing Jews is really wrong, that racism is absolutely objectively wrong. It's not, sir. It's all just a prejudice, a bias. Do you prefer Coke to Pepsi? It's a taste. Do you prefer murder to compassion and helping people? It's ultimately meaningless if there is no God. It's just a crapshoot. It's too easy to live in the past, isn't it? To hold grudges, to seek revenge. To forgive means to cancel a debt. If I hurt you, I owe you. If you rip a pound of flesh out of me, you owe me a pound of flesh. But to forgive means to cancel the debt. Often, when you and I have been hurt deeply enough, we need to forgive not just once or twice, but many times. For as you and I are hurt deeply, It's difficult to forget that. And it's too easy to begin to ruminate and obsess on it. And the challenge is every time you and I remember how despicably that person treated us, we have to forgive them. When I've been hurt most deeply in life, I've had to forgive and forgive and forgive the same dastardly thing that was done to me over and over again. For that is the only pathway out of bitterness into real love, real acceptance, real forgiveness. Often I'm asked, but Cliff, what happens if the person who did you dirty doesn't ask for forgiveness? We still need to forgive. The reason it's so important to forgive the person who refuses to ask for forgiveness is because if we harbor that bitterness and revenge, we continue to allow that person to hurt us, and we turn into bitter, hard people. In other words, the spirit of bitterness eats us up from the inside out. Jesus Christ calls you and me to forgive. One of the things that motivates us to forgive is understanding that all of us will answer to an all-knowing, just God one day on a day of judgment. And when you begin to realize that nobody's getting away with murder, you are free to forgive your enemy and to trust God, who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and just, to judge that person fairly. And that is exactly what the message of Jesus Christ is. You and I have been alienated from God because we've rebelled against Him. We've taken the good gifts He's given us and we've perverted them. Instead of worshiping God, we've ignored God or hated God, and we've worshiped ourselves and elevated ourselves to the position of God. In order to be reconciled with God, we need to ask for forgiveness. And when we ask for forgiveness, we're acknowledging, I did wrong. Please forgive me. When I realize I've done wrong, then I'm in a position to humble myself and ask for forgiveness, and Jesus Christ promises forgiveness to all who trust in Him. Have you asked Him for forgiveness? Have you put your faith and trust in Him, that He bled and died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sin, to reconcile you to God, to give you eternal life? You can make that decision right now, very simply but very profoundly. Put your trust in Christ. Ask Him for forgiveness. Trust that He bled and died on the cross to pay the penalty, to pay the debt that you owe for the wrong that you've done. God bless you as you make that most important decision to put your faith in Jesus Christ. I'm one of the pastors at Grace Community Church. We meet at Grace Farms, located at 365 Luke's Wood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. Every Sunday morning we meet at 9:30. I'd love to invite you to join us this Sunday for our 9:30 worship service. If you'd like to watch more of these discussions that we have with university students, simply go to Ask Cliff on YouTube or Give Me an Answer on YouTube. Thanks for joining us for these few minutes. Have a great day.